If the active shooter presents itself outside, outdoors, in a big venue, or at a popular place for people to go, what's different? That's today's topic. Stick around. Welcome to the Active Shooter Incident Management Podcast. My name is Bill Godfrey, your podcast host. I'm joined by three of my other fellow instructors here at the National Center for Integrated Emergency Response. Across the table from me is Billy Perry on the law enforcement side. Billy, good to have you back.
Good to be back, Bill. Thanks for having me.
All right, we got Chad Lake on the Fire EMS side. Chad, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
This is your first time on the podcast, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, excited to have you here.
Sweet.
And the old veteran, Ron Ottebacker on the law enforcement side. Ron, good to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, guys, today's topic is the outdoor threats. And this can go from an unexpected outdoor attack to something that, a planned function, a fair, a public assembly place, concert, theme park. We can go from there. And Ron, I'm going to start off with you and pose this question to you because I know when you were on the job, you worked for a county that, a very, very large county that had an endless stream of special events and outdoor functions, a lot of which required security and a whole bunch of theme parks in your jurisdiction. What were some of the things that were on your top of your mind when you guys, you got the permit in and you're having to review and set up a security plan for an outdoor venue?
First off, I wanted to know what the estimated crowd was going to be. So you've got an idea of how many resources you need to put there first. And then you look at the venue and say, where are your threats? Where could people be? Where could people potentially launch an attack at? We understand that, the first place that an active shooter event occurs is usually a business, but the second one is an outdoor event. So you've got to plan on those things. The other thing is, what resources are you going to bring to bear? Are you going to, set yourself up for success, such as create a rescue task force and have teams deploy as task forces around the venue so that if you have to roll into a tactical operation, then they're already pre-deployed and they're ready to go. You've got security with them. You've got, your EMS medical folks with it. And then, what are you going to do if something kicks off? How are you going to move people? Have you got it pre-planned so that, like they say, failure to plan is planning to fail. And you've got to decide, what would you do if something happened? And, then you've got to work on that and make sure that everyone's aware of what your plans are, including the venue people, because most of the people won't have a clue. And you're trying to do whatever you can to stop the chaos that would happen.
Billy, from your perspective, I know you did a very, very long time on the SWAT team. When you guys got called to do security details and were planning for these large, covering these large outdoor functions, what were some of the things that were on your mind from that super intense tactical perspective?
Well, like Ron said, and also with the bomb squad, you're looking for the probability. Where's the probability of an issue going to be? And even when you try to guess that, you're probably going to be wrong. But we look at the probability of what it is, what the likelihood of that event being a target, which that's vacillated a lot lately. Themes that were not only seemingly but are innocuous, whatever parade it is, as innocent as it can be, ends up being a target for something. But it's a lot of it's the same and a lot of it's vastly different. How are you going to stop a vehicle? Where are you going to be? The one thing, rarely do you really actually have cover. Cover is a vacillating thing in and of itself. And outside, you don't really have cover. And especially from the things that we worry about, which are gunfire, the elements, and things that we don't want to see us. So you've got to stay constantly mindful of things like that.
And Chad, on the Fire EMS side, what are the things that are on your mind when you're reviewing one of these events for a pre-plan? Where do you look at it for pre-deployment, and what are the decisions that are going through your head?
Well, I think one of our biggest issues is going to be, how do we get our transporting units in and out of the scene what is the easiest access for that? With the venue, do they have roads already closed down and the access points of coming into those venues? And how do we get with our law enforcement to make sure that that could be a good exit route? And how long is it going to take to open that up just for fire EMS side? Pre-staging our RTF teams, excuse me, in different areas. Again, just like Ron said, you want to do that pre-planning. Definitely do a couple walkthroughs before the event takes off. But where's going to be the easiest access points for us? And then more importantly, where's our transport units? And are we going to pre-stage those areas?
So I know that, some agencies will do an incident action plan as part of a venue pre-plan that kind of lays out whose duties are going to be assigned. How often have you seen that occur versus not occur? And is there typically an all hands meeting where everybody there, law enforcement, fire, EMS, gets a common briefing? What are some of the good and some of the bad that you've seen, Ron?
It actually depends on the size of the event.
Yeah.
And the example I like to use is presidential visits. Everyone comes together and we handle it as appropriate. Smaller events, you may only have, a sector sergeant doing all the planning, so they may not do an incident action plan. In my mind, everyone should do one. You should know exactly what you have planned, what you have prepared for, and there should be someone review it to say, hey, did you think about this? Just that little review before it comes up. So you have a discussion, and there's no reason why, if we're working with the fire department, we're not talking to the fire department. I'm sorry. We're not talking to the fire department and saying, this is what our plan is. What's your plan? And, it's more than just show up that day and, the lieutenant from the engine company and the sergeant from the patrol units are there, and they never talk to each other at all.
Yeah. Chad, how about you? I know you've been involved in a lot of the pre-planning for a lot of events, some big, some small. What are the things that are on your mind about putting together a plan and making sure everybody gets briefed?
The biggest thing is also getting with law enforcement, doing that walkthrough with law enforcement and coming up with the what ifs. If this happened, what's our response look like? Where do you find the areas of concern is going to be a big deal. And then constantly going and having those meetings and those conversations days, weeks in advance to do that. The hardest thing is when everybody's busy and trying to get on the same schedule with different agencies. And is it just law enforcement and fire? Do we want to get the Office of Emergency Management involved or the EOC people? All those different components all on the same page at the same day doing these walkthroughs, that can be challenging too. And everybody's got to prioritize that time to do that.
And we think we all speak the same language, but we don't.
We do not.
And the example I like to use is, if you tell law enforcement, charge the line, we're in an ERT situation, we're moving people back. If you tell the fire department, charge the line, you got water going down range. If you tell the power people to charge the line, we're all getting electrocuted. But we all think it means the same thing, and it doesn't. So we've got to make sure that our communication is squared away so everyone understands what we're talking about.
And I think all too often we have meetings, but we have meetings that are long and that are arduous and
not terribly useful.
Not useful at all, frankly. And I think that the time for planning, the time for preparation is many, many, many events before this big one. And I think having exposure with each other and understanding how we work, because there's an old Murphy's Law of combat, no attack or no contact survives the plan intact. None of it. Everything changes, and it happens in real life too. So I think we have to be used to working with each other. We have to learn what each other's language means. And I think knowing where our crossfire situations are, where everybody's going to be, who has the main area of responsibility, that's the thing. And like Chad's saying, I think having RTFs pre-deployed and used to working together is key.
It's so interesting. Chad mentioned, when he was looking at it, what are the areas of concern? And you kind of talked about that too. You said, how do we stop a vehicle from coming in through the crowd? What in your mind would, because you can look at this from a very interesting perspective, not just as a law enforcement officer, not just as a SWAT guy, but also as a bomb guy. What in a large, let's say an outdoor concert, 25, 30,000 people, what in your mind becomes some of those areas of concern that you would be like, we should do something there?
I think egress, I think ways that people can get something there, whether it's a vehicle-borne IED or whether it's something just to ram a crowd, which has become increasingly popular as of late. Being aware of that and however we're going to stop that, whether it's bollards or whatever barricades we're going to use, which can be a vehicle. Fire trucks are really good at that. And, what are we going to do there? I think area denial is important, but I think intelligence and awareness is nothing replaces.
Yeah, if I can add, with the barricades and stuff too, and setting it up for a good secure perimeter, will that hinder where ambulances or transporting units can come in? Because that area might be a great ambulance exchange point. But now we have to, how easy it is to move barricades.
Not.
Obviously, we're not using plastic barrels to stop a car. But if it's a garbage truck or a fire truck, can we just get in that, move it, and then bring it back?
Right.
That'd be a better idea than maybe using these big barricades that we can't move.
Yeah, and I know that I've seen a number of venues where they've used, big public works trucks, dump trucks, cement trucks, things like that as physical barricades, and that which might lend itself to what you're describing, Chad, about being a movable barricade. When you're laying out the plan, we talked about, the idea of your contact teams or where you're going to put your SWAT guys or rescue task force. But what about all the other positions that would need to be stood up if there was an event? Staging, tactical triage and transports location. Should those all be pre-planned, and should we have more than one?
Obviously, I'm a Department of Redundancy department guy. I think 2 is 1, 1 is none. So yeah, I think your QRS, your quick reaction forces, I think, your observers, your sniper observers, I think all those have to be redundant and know where they are, know where each other is, obviously, know where your RTFs are primarily, even though they're going to have an area they respond to. But, and I think the role of the RTF, I don't want to speak out of school, but I think in an outdoor event, something like that role could almost be tweaked because they could have a greater propensity, if they're a pre-stage unit, they have a greater propensity for firing and taking fire than in a response unit. Does that make sense?
Because they're already on the field.
They're already on the field. Is that?
Yeah.
Am I saying that correctly? I guess.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it'd be a concern whether you've got them deployed. I think back to the 1 October attack that occurred out in Vegas, and now it was so large and just so overwhelming that a lot of the pre-planned assumptions kind of went out of the window, and they ended up with something that overall was too big to manage as one thing and having to split it up into a bunch of different things. And I'm wondering, when you're pre-planning an event, should that be a consideration? What if this really does go sideways and we end up with hundreds injured?
Right.
Does that change the math on how you prepare?
Absolutely, it does, because you've got all your pre-positioned units, and that may include, people that are deployed throughout the crowd just to monitor the crowd. That would include the fire folks. But once it hits that, you got all the follow-on responders coming. Where do they go to? How did they get in? We blocked off access. More than just the ambulance exchange point. Now you've got all your follow-on units coming in to assist, and they can't get in. And we talked about, and we used dump trucks back for several presidential visits. And are your drivers staying with the dump trucks? Are they taking the keys out? So there's so many things you have to think about that may not be on our initial focus that you've got to consider to make sure that your response is appropriate. But in a situation like that, just as any active shooter event, you're going to have a bunch of folks, and where are you going to put those folks when they get there? How are they going to get in to where you need them?
Chad, what do you think?
I think, going back to the RTF too, if you're on the open area and something does happen, would it be unrealistic to bump up more of the law enforcement side of that RTF team? So instead of the traditional 2 and 2, what if I do 2 and 4 because I'm open and I'm, for the protection for the fire EMS guys, we can have more security looking out for maybe additional hazards or threats. And we can, so that the fire EMS guys can go start treating, and whether they're moving the patients or whatever the case may be. So maybe alter your RTF setup, and then having your command positions, having them pre-planned in a way. But again, just Bill, like you said, having them into a different, what's plan A, what's plan B, what's plan C, because all of that's going to change depending on where the attack is and where, those hazards could be going. And then you're seeing what could happen next is something else coming behind it. So you might have to have your initial plan, your alternate plan, and then A through Z, just in case.
Okay. So now let me spin us a little bit different direction. So we were talking there about the idea of a pre-planned event where we're have some large outdoor function. Now I want you to think about instead something that is not pre-planned. Take your typical park where on the weekends it's a very popular location for birthday parties. It's one of these very large, very nice parks, and there's typically hundreds, if not 1,000 people there on the weekends. Gatherings of people for all different kinds of celebrations, and you end up with an attack. And then this particular scenario, you have an attacker that's shooting. You've got a whole bunch of people, more than a dozen, that have been already hit. When you're rolling into that as the first arriving officers, what is different about that being an outdoor area, Billy?
Well, where are most officers shot?
Outdoors.
On the approach, correct? So, you're in the hopper. However, it is one of those dichotomies, and it's one of those extenuating circumstances where, for eons, officers have said, it's not my job to get shot, and my personal pet peeve is any officer that says the most important thing is for me to go home at night, because that's totally contraindicative of my ethos and the law enforcement officer code of ethics. However, if they are shooting at you, it's better than them shooting at an innocent, because nobody voluntold you to do this, and I think you can go do it. And I think you've got to be aggressive. You've got to locate, close with, and engage. And it's crazy. It's probably the most dangerous thing that is done in law enforcement based on studies. Is that not accurate?
No, that's the recent studies, and they continue to prove out that most officers are being shot on the exterior, most commonly on the approach to the building, not on the interior doing room entries where there's an inordinate amount of training taking place. Ron, how about you? You're one of the first few officers rolling in. What's on your mind that's a little bit different about it being a large outdoor area with people just kind of running everywhere?
Trying to isolate the bad guy, figure out where he's at or she's at, and trying to move towards that threat, trying to neutralize the threat, but in a building, they tend to migrate to a certain area. Out in the open, you have no idea where they could go to. You have no idea, is the description you're getting a good description? Because now you got to sort through 1,000 people that are all standing there to find that needle in the haystack.
The one negative truth.
Right. And so the other thing is, how are you deciding to move? Are you moving as a single person? If you're the first one there, you're going to move as a single person. There's so many variables that you have to look at. Where was they last seen? What was the last encounter they did? What type of weapon they have? You're looking at everything. And I think there's more of an unknown out in an open area than there is in a building, in my mind, just because you have no idea where they've traversed to. And
it's a challenge. We trained in bounding.
Right.
We trained our patrol. You did
Overwatch
as well. Bounding Overwatch. And you would give a class on it, and you would explain it. You would even model it, and then they would do it primarily wrong. And then that's the last time they did it.
But they remembered to do it correctly in the field.
Right.
No,
ever, and except for never, and not that they didn't want to. It's just that's the nature of the beast. That's the way it is, and you don't have time to become a master of everything. But I think that's a biggie. But we've got to find them, close with them. The other thing is getting fixated on it, because they do leave, and if they leave, you've won. And we stay focused on they're here. Well, they're not. They're gone. And
so you gave me a perfect segue, because I'm going to bring up the difficulty level here and put it to you this way. You've got over a dozen people that are down. There are just hundreds and hundreds of people screaming, running around, some hiding, fleeing. The shooting has stopped, and you have no information on whether the suspect is still in the park or has left the scene, but there is no shooting going on when you arrive. How do you work to secure the area to be able to get a rescue task force in? Chad, I'm going to come to you after.
Allow me to quote some heroes. Known bleeding does not stop for unknown threats. The end.
And has your planning been sufficient enough to where, if you've got that big a crowd, do you have any of your armored vehicles there? Can they go up, put themselves between someone, or can we put the people? We used to practice, victim rescue up through the bottom of the armored personnel.
And do you know where the between is? Because if they're moving, they can move anywhere.
Right.
And so, sometimes you just kind of lean into the strike zone and hope it doesn't hit you and pick them up, and if we do get engaged, engage back.
So no shootings going on. It is by now, a warm zone, as we've had 5-10 minutes with no gunshots fired. We need to get the rescue task forces in. What, if anything, do we do differently about how those rescue task forces move forward and engage with the patients?
Well, we're going to get flamed for this, but I'm going to be like, Chad, let's do this. We're about to write songs about us. Let's go. And,
We're in.
And make it happen.
Yeah. Chad, what are your thoughts? Assume you're, one of the rescue task force leaders on the first one going in, being open and understanding what's going on. Does it change your math on how quickly you want to get those patients up off the ground and moved, where you're going to do some of your treatment? Does it affect your decision making?
I don't think so. If law enforcement tells us it is secured, and we all know we're in a warm zone and it is secured, we're going in. We have to trust that they're going to provide our security. Let's all jump into an engine or a suppression unit, drive up to the scene, and we can maybe use that as a shield while we get out and we can start assessing the patients and starting to triage appropriately which ones are critical, which ones need to go. The challenge would be if it's like you said, it's a big park and all 15 are injured are not together, and you have injured hundreds of feet away. You need more RTFs and more resources down there, including law enforcement, to secure that little area as well. That's going to be the challenge. But as long as law enforcement says it's secured, we have to trust that, and we have to be all in.
And by the way, I want to kind of define what we mean for, the warm zone means security measures have been taken by law enforcement. Doesn't mean it's safe.
Nope.
Doesn't mean that the security measures are adequate. It just means
you got something there.
Right.
Something's there.
And I think we have to rely on the A, B, C, D, S of cover. A is accurate fire, B is ballistics, C is actually cover, D is distance, and S is speed. And I think if we can get in there, scoop them, get them out, that's going to be because again, it's stopped. If they're over here and we know they're over here, it's easy to put a barricade there. If they're not, if we have no idea where the suspect is, that's where to barricade from what? Because if we're barricading here, they're over here. We just have to be able to have our heads on a swivel, move quickly, assess quickly, treat quickly, and move.
Let me ask you this. Chad mentioned the idea of bringing the fire truck forward and trying to use it as a partial barricade, at least on one side. Does that help? Does that make it better if you bring one or two fire trucks in? If your people are in a common area, the typical pavilion setup where you've got a couple pavilions that are next to each other, the barbecue grills, and that's where the bulk of the people are laying. Does it help to get a little bit of cover even on one side?
I'm a big fire truck fan. I've used them for Class A anchors my whole career. I'll tie off to a fire truck in a minute, so yeah, and fire trucks are cover.
Provided you put the water between you and the bad guy.
Right, or the
We're
wheels
just counting on the
and the
aluminum siding of the fire truck.
Right. No,
It's
put the
just
water
gonna
or
totally
in the axles and the stuff.
The hose bed. That's a good stopper
Yes,
too.
it's a really good stopper. It's a good
All right.
baffle.
Well, as we wrap this one up, outdoor responses, does it really change anything? Or is it really the same process. You just got more areas of exposure.
That's it. It's the same process, but it's
More complex.
more complex in the sense that you don't have concealment.
It's the same but harder.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same
Same
but
but different.
Same but different. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up with that one there. Thank you to our producer, Carla Torres. As always, if you have some questions about this, you can put them into the comments or shoot us an email at info@c3pathways.com. That's info@c3pathways.com. Or if you have some particular challenges you'd like to discuss, give us a call. And until next time, stay safe.